Okay, so let's finish up this cursory analysis of other moral point of view for the sake of showing that they are not as distant or as incompatible with this appeal to Kantian autonomy as they appear at first sight. With Hume, so what can we say about moral sentimentalism and its possible compatibility with this appeal to autonomy, distancing of one's own inclinations and interests? Okay, we already said that Kant acknowledges the importance of passions in the execution of duties, and this, of course, already takes us close to the spirit of moral sentimentalism. But I think this helps us only to a point. More promising is to show that Humeans, there was a paper called the Humeans Right, to show that Humeans need not be opposed to our foundation. I think it's more important to recall how Hume himself recognizes that morality cannot be reduced to a natural, mechanical, emotional, subjective reaction to what causes sympathetic pleasure or displeasure. When Hume talks about the necessity to, for Hume's famous thesis, reason is the slave of the passions. You won't be moved in the least unless your emotional apparatus leads you to do so. But at the same time, when Hume talks about the necessity to correct the bias of our emotional reaction in favor of the near and near, or when he deals with the virtue in rags problem, he implicitly, I guess, recognizes that morality is about impartiality and the ability to take distance from personal inclination. So, for example, Hume thinks that our response, emotional response that would lead us to a strong bias in favor of the near and dear in deciding our action has to be balanced by, I would say, reason in such a way that we correct this balance in favor of those we love most. Moreover, in deciding what is virtuous and what is vicious, Hume thinks we rely on our ability to discern what personality traits are beneficial or harmful in general. So, when he offers us his famous thesis that ultimately good and bad in morality is just a way of describing moral traits in people that are capable of generating good consequences or bad consequences, that is, consequences that produce utility for people or disutility. He implicitly again recognizes that we are not after a mechanical, sensual response to stimuli that come from the specific moral circumstances that we are asked to deal with. Rather, we are expected to make some evaluation that ultimately cannot be reduced to an emotional response. Moreover, he at times talks also of a common point of view from which these personality traits are to be judged. So it's not my perspective about these personality traits that decides whether they are good or bad or they produce good or bad consequences, but it's a general perspective. And I would say that both this taking distance and the ability to reach a common perspective are consonant with, if not enabled by, the ability to master our immediate passions for the sake of morality. In other words, unless we are autonomous the way I claim, it's not evident to me how even Hume could claim that we have to correct the bias in favor of the near and dear, we have to deal with the problem of the virtue in rags, we have to assume this common perspective, we have to respond not to personality traits that are beneficial to me but rather those that are beneficial or harmful to society at large. So I guess that even in moral sentimentalism there is room to say that reason still has a significant role to play. Okay, I mean, I don't need to tell you or to explain that this is a cursory treatment of giants in the history of ethical thought, and that's what they are worth of. So that's what the discussion is worth of. But I mean, I was trying to show that I guess there are resources for showing that my appeal to autonomy does not confine me to the rather narrow circle of Kantians. I'm not trying to put forward an account of human worth that could be strictly accepted only by Kantians only, which would be quite unsatisfactory. Okay, so let's move to the second point of departure that I have from Kant. While we believe that of all the animal world, the capacity to act from duty is most developed in the human species, I also believe that humans do not possess it exclusively. Why do I believe that? Because science tells me that that's the case, at least science as I interpreted it. Since the pioneering work by Rosemary Roth, Biology, Ethics and Animals, 1990, followed by the philosophically more sophisticated work by David de Gracia, taking animals seriously, we know that animals have a rich mental life that includes self-awareness and moral dilemmas. I mean, people like Georgia and I who had dogs know that very well. I mean, when you see that the dog knows that he doesn't have to do that, but he wants to do that. If that is not a moral dilemma, what else it is? More recently, Franz de Waal has argued that if we define normativity as adherence to an ideal or standard, then there is ample evidence that animals treat their social relationships in this manner. So if we define normativity or morality as adherence to an ideal standard, which is exactly the way I am suggesting, the restricted way I'm suggesting we can adopt for the sake of showing human worth, then there is ample empirical evidence that animals have this ability to adhere to an ideal or a standard. He points out, for example, that most animals show acts that are costly to the performer, but that they benefit the recipient. Moreover, animals show they show empathic responses to the distress of their fellows. And finally, some large-brained animals, primates, show a form of helping that entails awareness of how the other will benefit from being helped. The same point is reinforced by Beacock and Peirce, who find unmistakable traces of moral, so understood, behavior not only in higher mammals, but even in rodents, so mice, with rats that refuse to accept a reward because this would cause other rats a shock. Similar conclusions are reached by Bartal, Dicety and Mason, more recently, who observed how rats free cage mates even when this entails the necessity to share with them a reward. I mean, perhaps they're just stupid here. They don't know the consequences, but no, I'm joking. I'm sure that they In setting up the experiment, they made sure to prove that the rats that free the mates know about the consequences of these freeing competitors for food. So even outside academia, I mean, that's the point I just made, common sense knows quite well that moral prescription may lead animals to sacrifice their life for the sake of their offspring, and at times even for the sake of humans, as the numerous examples of heroic behavior by dogs prove beyond doubt. Thus, morality, defined loosely as adherence to some impartial norm or ideal to the possible detriment of one's selfish interest, does not seem to be a prerogative of humans, even when the ideal requires the highest sacrifice, so survival. And this conclusion is hardly surprising in our scientific paradigm, still dominated by evolutionary theory, and rightly so, I would add, see if the alternative is creationism. It is to be expected that morality is not considered as emerging out of nowhere, but following the development of the species, with higher one's species simply taking a trait, in this case pro-social behavior, to a higher level of completion, as opposed to creating one afresh. Within the Darwinian scientific paradigm, one should expect that there is no gap between humans and other species. Morality, like other bits of behavior, is an evolved trait that we unquestionably share with other social mammals. Yet another of these traits we thought uniquely ours, like language, reason, there is a series of candidates that ultimately we discovered are not, strictly speaking, our peculiarity, turns out to be robustly present in other sufficiently close animal species. Obviously, in observing animal moral behavior, scientists operate with a definition of morality that is loose enough to allow cross-species generalizations. This is significantly distant from the definition of morality we attribute to humans, central to which is an impartial commitment to abstract principles of fairness, such as the golden rule or the categorical imperative, where feelings of solidarity or empathy are not necessarily part of the picture, the way in which, of course, are with animals. It would be hard to say that in the actions that animals perform, the emotional side of it is not a necessary component. Nobody argues that animals undergo a process of moral deliberation in which different alternatives are scrutinized for consonance with abstract moral rules. The same evidence that suggests forcefully the presence of a broadly defined moral life in animals also suggests how this is governed by feelings of empathy for other subjects, not necessarily fellow members of the same species. This sort of morality, however, is not different in kind from the morality our approach attributes to humans, and on which their value supposedly rests. In fact, what is common is the readiness to sacrifice one's interest for the sake of a social, or at any rate, non-selfish end. Both in the case of human and in the case of non-human mammals, what grounds the worth of the species is the ability to follow a rule that transcends the satisfaction of individual needs and desires. Should we then concede human rights to animals, perhaps to higher mammals, apes, monkeys? If human values is tied so closely to morality, and morality is not a prerogative of our species, are we committed to the immensely counterintuitive conclusion that dogs and cats should have exactly the same amount of protection human rights promise to offer to our species? Maybe, but more likely no. We can decide that behavior inspired by duty-based morality is not a prerogative of humans without denying the huge differences in the degree to which different mammals display an ability to detach themselves from selfish drives. The freedom from natural tribes humans have gained through their evolution is vastly superior to the distance even the most sophisticated primates display. If we identify, as we do, the worth of a species with the ability of its individual members to sacrifice for a moral cause, where moral is broadly and loosely understood as non-selfish behavior for the sake of some idea, we can say that humans reach peaks of moral behavior and of course of degradation on the other side of the spectrum, unknown to other species. In a sense, evolution has generated so great a difference between humans and non-human mammals in this regard that what used to be a difference in degree now has come to appear as a difference in kind. While animal moral behavior suggests a general reconsideration of the way in which that's a point that I'd like to discuss with some people who know more than I do. I mean, it is clearly the case that in the last 10,000 years, humans have evolved quite rapidly. I mean, we are significantly different than the Neanderthal man. Have dogs and cats and higher mammals evolved in the same way? Because that would be an interesting point that speaks to something that I'm suggesting here. That the point is not so much that we were born different. The specificity of us is that we evolved a lot. And I don't know whether that's true, but intuitively it seems to be the case. I mean, I don't think that cats and dogs have evolved the way we did from, the point in which there were only Neanderthal humans here.
Argument from Occidental point of view, because there are civility in Africa, Asia, or South America. They don't progress in this way, and I don't know. But I imagine that the
it's a Western
idea of progress is different by us, for us, and for others form of culture. And in this case, when you put very close the idea of evolution with human rights, you make a dangerous difference.
Yeah, right. I guess you're right about the fact that I'm assuming, in defining human progress in terms of ability to distance oneself from one's impulses, but I don't know whether that's entirely true. My point is that even, recently there was this group of Indians discovered in the Amazon forest, never had contact with other humans apparently. My point is that even they are more different than the Neanderthal men than we are different than Neanderthal. I mean, they evolved more from the Neanderthal stage than the Neanderthal dog has evolved from there. So again, I'm just speculating because I'm not a biologist and I don't know, but just an idea that came to my mind. Maybe what is really special about us is that we change much more than other species, that we evolve, if you want to take a progressive view, but at least that we change more rapidly than other species.
Professor,
yeah.
I just want to make sure I understand what you're saying about evolution and behavioral traits.
Yes.
You're not saying that morality evolved by the process of natural selection, like other animals, or you're implying that just we are humans and we just passed through the process of natural selection like any other animals, and we share some traits, but these traits are moral traits or are just behavior? because I don't know if you get the point, but if morality is founded in evolution, it seems odd to me that because evolution is always in progress, so natural selection doesn't stop. So does morality, in a way that it could not be an objective thing, but a contingent thing.
Right.
Or morality is founded outside
of
the process of evolution, and we discovered that because evolution shaped our cognitive faculties or something like this.
No, I'm making a different point. I'm not saying that the content of morality depends on evolution. I'm saying that the capacities that are a prerequisite for morality change through evolution. So this distance from one's own passions or one's own interests, one's own needs, may be an evolutionary trait that enables morality, even if of morality you have a purely objectivist perspective. So you think that the moral law has always been one throughout times, but there is still room for saying that the natural setting that allows you to follow the moral law has changed throughout evolution, and that's the point I'm making. And I'm saying that it would be odd to believe that within a Darwinian framework, it would be odd to believe that these humans, this specific species, again, this particular species, came out with this mark from the very beginning of autonomy there, out of nowhere, whereas other species do not have this stamp. It seems to me more plausible if you work within this Darwinian perspective. If you are a creationist, of course, it's God that created the world, and He was happy to give humans as His offsprings this trait, and others creatures deny this feature. So, but if you are within a Darwinian perspective, you have to think of let's call it the subjective enabling side of morality, that is what you need to be in order to follow the moral law, as something that has followed the evolutionary pattern. And so if that is the case, it is also very plausible to believe that the same trait is at a lower level of sophistication and development also in other species. That is all I'm arguing.
I'm just saying that because there are some philosophers like Michael Ruse that says that our morality is just a matter of adaptation.
Right.
But you're not taking this
No,
role at all.
not necessarily.
You're saying that the conditions of possibility
Yes.
to be autonomous
Yes.
came from the process of evolution, not the moral itself.
Yeah. Well, I guess that you got the point. I mean, by moving from a difference in kind to a difference in degree, I'm trying to, as we say in Italian, avere la botte piena e la moglie ubriaca, which is literally translation would be to have the bottle full and the wife drunk, which so I'm trying again to put together, on the one hand, the requirement that we need a capacity that we have at a peculiar level, at least, and on the other hand, we need not to go against the scientific paradigm we live in. When a new paradigm will come, we will redo our philosophy, but I tend to think that it's not a great idea to offer a philosophical position that is completely at odds with what science tells us. Okay, so I can I can skip the next paragraph, because I've already told you why my approach is different from Griffin's, and why an appeal to autonomy is not to be completed with an appeal to personhood or agency or purposive agency, as he calls it sometimes. So I'm not going to read this. No, I'm going up and not down. And I'm also skipping my discussion of the difference between my account of dignity, as I said, compared to one by Jeremy Waldron, by Michael Rosen, and Joseph Catel, who are the leading philosophers who, in the last 10 years, have produced monographs on the notion of dignity. So if you're interested, you're welcome to read it. I'm more interested in giving you a sense, not much more than this, because wow, it's already 11:45, giving you a sense, of course, of the objections that likely are going to be raised and have been raised, in fact, against my approach. Well, probably the deepest objection one could have is that how are you so certain that we are autonomous? Because not even Kant, in a sense, was certain that we are autonomous, right? It's not, an empirical truth, something that we can prove. At most, it is a sort of conceptual necessity from a practical point of view. So, if there is no reason to, if there is no empirical proof that we are autonomous, is it a good idea to have an account of human dignity that rests on these bits of speculation? What can we say? This objection may have variations, may come in different forms. On the one hand, those who doubt for religious, philosophical, sociological, or psychological reasons that we are as free as is commonly assumed might find it counterproductive to link our dignity so rigidly to our autonomy. We might be non-free, determined beings, but we would still be capable of suffering. So that's a problem that a utilitarian does not have. Even if we are not as free as Kant thought, we are still capable of suffering, so the utilitarians have no such problem. So why not anchor our dignity to our vulnerability as opposed to some abstract, less evident property? On the other hand, since we are linking human dignity to a genetic, relatively non-problematic notion of freedom, we are linking dignity not to a generic, relatively non-problematic notion of freedom, that is, everybody can do whatever he or she wants, that is commonsensical. If you ask the famous man of the street, he said, "Are you free?" And he said, "Yes, I think so. I now want to go to bed, I go to bed, I don't want to go to bed, I don't go to bed, and I'm free." So, at least, if you assume that definition of freedom, at least you are close to common sense. But for us there is a further difficulty, because we are not assuming that definition of freedom. We are assuming a more demanding one, that the famous man of the street, assuming that he understands what we are talking about, would not be as ready to accept as the other one. Finally, Kantian autonomy is a faculty which by definition we can have no experience of. By assuming its reality, we are presupposing a sort of fracture in the chain of causal events through which we usually read our world. Given all this, is an appeal to autonomy really a good idea? So, to answer this objection, I think it's crucial to understand what needs to be proved about our autonomy in the context of a foundation of human rights. So, I think myself I'm not obliged to give the ultimate answer about the truth of moral philosophy regarding the fact whether we are autonomous or not. Although we enter here the terrain of metaphysics, this doesn't mean that our ambition needs to be that of solving once for all the never-ending disputes among philosophers about the reality of freedom, the existence of truly moral behavior or the like, determinism, and you name it. What we need is, more modestly, an account of human autonomy that rest on good, albeit non-conclusive philosophical reason, and that B is consonant with the way in which humans across cultures look at themselves. So I guess I'm suggesting not very explicitly that even if it's not true that we are autonomous, all that counts is the way in which we take ourselves. So it could be that from the perspective of God, it's, morality is an illusion, is something that Kant himself says, but what really counts is the way in which we think of ourselves, because we are talking about our rights and the way in which we decide to treat each other. So if we want to justify the way in which we treat each other, it's more important the way we think of ourselves than the way in which, from a God's eye point of view, things really are, we really are. So to construct such an account, we can start, but only start, from the way in which Kant thought that the reality of freedom could be proved. Of course, what follows is of a necessity a brief and simplified account of a complex and difficult story that Kant develops over the years with substantial changes. You know that he gives an account that it looks like the opposite of what in the groundwork, that looks like the opposite in the second critique. He reversed the order of the argument. In the groundwork, it seems to be from freedom to morality. In the second critique, it's from freedom to the moral law. So first, the account of the conceptual analysis of what morality is, and then the argument that this presupposes freedom. Whereas in the second critique, you have the other way around, the appeal to the fact of reason that is not present in the groundwork. So, this is all well known to Kant interpreters. So, I'm giving here a very simplified account. So, after an attempt in the groundwork, the critique of practical reason grounds the thesis that we are autonomous, albeit only from a practical point of view, which is something that will be explained, on an appeal to the so-called fact of reason. On the most reasonable reading, this fact, or as Kant says, fact as it were, is the immediate consciousness that each of us has of the inescapable authority of the moral law. So, am I allowed to not to pay back the money that I borrowed? Kant thinks everybody knows that it's not okay. We can make an exception to the law, but it's not that we really think that it's okay not to, give back the money. So morality is something that everybody understands according to Kant. And this fact that it has some take on us, that we have a problem when we want to break the moral law because we take it as valid. It's not, just a rule that has no appeal to us. So that's, in my very simplified account of the fact of reason. Why? To understand this idea of the immediate facticity through which we become conscious of moral constraints, it is perhaps best to use Kant's own examples. Okay, this is the example I already gave, that we know that we can't resist the threat by the dictator, and basically this means that faced with a moral issue of this kind, everybody's reaction will infallibly combine certainty about what ought to be done, uncertainty, perhaps skepticism that we would be courageous enough to do the right thing, and yet undiminished certainty that we could do it. So, this is the fact of reason. So the fact that we know that we are autonomous, and the fact that, the fact of reason on my account is the immediate consciousness of the immediate bindingness of the moral law for us. The immediate bindingness means that first you know what should be done, second that you know that you could do what is obligatory. This basically is the best argument we have to believe that we are autonomous, quite crudely. The encounter between our consciousness and the dictates of morality, the Kantian fact of reason, proves that our freedom or capacity for self-determination extends farther than the capacity to respond intelligently to needs or desires. Negatively, we cannot act even if no empirical drive motivates us. Positively, so the positive definition of autonomy is that we can find a pure interest in the rightness of the action that morality demands. So, famous theory of the pure interest in the moral law. For Kant, you always need an interest to act, even when you act morally. The difference is just that the interest that you have when you act morally is a pure interest. And what is the pure interest? Well, exactly the fact that you think that the moral law is right. that you don't think it's it's an imposition that comes from some illegitimate authority. It comes from your freedom. It's your freedom, your reason is your reason that tells you that this is what you should do. So, of course, as Kant knew very well, there is always the possibility that when I think I am acting from duty, I am instead motivated by sensuous drives that are unconscious, as in the familiar case of moral acts performed more or less consciously to win social admiration or some form of personal satisfaction. I do it to feel well with myself. I am moral because I want to feel well. So these exceptional cases, however, cannot shake our immediate consciousness that we can always do what morality commands. This point seems to be so entrenched in our self-knowledge, maybe it's false from the point of view of God, but it's so deep in our self-knowledge, in the way in which we look at ourselves, that denying this capacity would entail a substantial restructuring of the way in which we usually look at our agency. Ultimately, we would have to abandon the thought that the ultimate decision-making authority regarding our lives lies within, deny that it lies within ourselves. The very idea that we are agents in control of our lives as opposed to mere states of affairs in cause of chain that we can neither initiate nor stop would be at risk if not removed altogether. So the cost of abandoning autonomy is abandoning the view that we are not just state of affairs that evolve, but that we are controlling this evolution and what happens to us. So this very sketchy account of the way in which Kant proves from the practical point of view, again, there is no scientific evidence that can show that we are autonomous, or to put it in his terminology, that pure reason is practical, is to be complemented by a reflection on whether the Kantian notion of autonomy is close enough to cross-cultural common sense, not by various cultures, religion, and traditions, because this is something that I will do at the end of the chapter, and that is too long to be done today. This is important because we don't want to ground human rights on a notion, no matter how solid after philosophical scrutiny, that does not appeal to the ordinary understanding of people across cultures and tradition, which legitimately no interest in the subtleties of Kantian scholarship. To approach this question, it is best to ask what would happen to the picture we have of ourselves if we were to think that we are not autonomous in the sense specified. Common sense concedes all sorts of mitigating circumstances for immoral actions that were strongly motivated, almost necessitated by our sensuous interest. Again, to take an extreme example, quite invariably across cultures, one resists passing too harsh a judgment on, say, a mother who lies or even offers false testimony in a tribunal to save her son's life. The details do not matter here. Nonetheless, some blame remains. At times, imagine a false testimony that ruined someone else's life. I mean, okay, I understand you did it to save your life, the life of your son, but what about the other one who was found guilty instead of your son? So, the consequences of a lie, no matter how understandable, can be serious. Implicit in common sense is the idea that humans could do, so why is this example significant in my mind? Because this shows that even common sense assume that humans could do what morality requires, even in the most adverse circumstances. Otherwise, it would not make sense to blame the mother for having done what she has done. Blame mildly and still blame a little bit, because you say, well, okay, fine, but what about the life of this other guy who was found guilty? So this shows the negative side of autonomy, so what I before called the independence of sensus necessitation. What about the positive side of autonomy? So the ability to find an interest in the sheer conformity of your action to the moral law, conformity. I mean, to find an interest in the fact that your action is inspired by the righteousness of the action itself. Well, why it may be difficult to find narratives of behavior explicitly inspired by the categorical imperatives, I mean, formulas of the categorical imperative, examples of agency generally inspired by duty abound in world literature and in the sacred text of all major religions. Think of Abraham in Christianity and Judaism, Asiya in Islam, or Arjuna in Hinduism, just to give the best known examples. As we said before, I mean, Abraham is the one who was about to kill his son. Asiya in Islam, I think, does something similar, I forgot now, but it's really, again, is about, following God's command to do something to a family member. Arjuna is the hero in the sacred text of Hinduism, who undergoes an internal battle on whether he should start a war against people among which there are relatives. As we said before, what duty requires may vary within limits across traditions. What is quite constant is that examples of moral heroism always imply some form of self-sacrifice, control over one's passions, and the ability to be motivated strongly enough by the thought that that is what ought to be done. Thus, the Kantian notion of autonomy, even if it appears as loaded with thick metaphysical assumption, comes very close to a rather uncontroversial and transcultural notion of agency. According to common sense, you are an agent as opposed to something that is operated or acted on by someone or something else, if and only if you have the ability to decide, pretty much in any circumstances, even the most difficult, the course of your action. This property, as I showed in the chapter 1, is not simply the ability to decide what are the most efficient means for an end someone else or something else has set for you. This is a form of freedom that is quite widespread in the animal world. Agency in the specified sense, so autonomy, requires a full control over one's choices. If someone were to justify a theft with the excuse that she could not master her passion, it seems common sense would leave only two possibilities before us. We can either believe the story, so we take seriously the idea that she or he was a kleptomaniac, but at that point we would assign some sort of sickness to the guy and consider her less than an agent, or we could refuse to believe the story, still consider the person an agent, and at most concede some mitigating circumstances for the theft. without removing the blame altogether. This shows that autonomy, not mere practical freedom, is an essential component of the way in which common sense, not only Kant, considers human nature. Okay, I mean, you know this stuff about the inexistence of a proof, so I'm not going to repeat what I just said. Let me finish very quickly with two other objections that could be raised against the dignity approach. One is the value-right conflation, and the other one is the so-called threshold objection that I have already introduced in the first lecture, I think. Okay, so in a famous essay, Raz provided a powerful objection to all accounts of human rights that move, like mine, from the identification of some valuable features of human beings to the claim that we have a set of rights, rights to the conditions that make the enjoyment and or the expression of these features possible. Taking Gilbert and Griffin as his main targets, Raz argues that the basic misconception that infects all traditional account is that it misconceives the relation between values and rights. The simple fact that certain conditions are necessary for our life or for a worthy life does not prove that we have a right to them. Remember, it's the objection that we use against the instrumentalist. The fact that I need that is not a sufficient argument to say that I have a right to that. Translated against the orthodox is the fact that that I am an autonomous agent is not a sufficient ground for providing me all I need in order to exercise autonomy or something like that. Now, even if we agree with Griffin that personhood is the most important feature shared by all human beings and that we all recognize this importance, we have still to prove that we have a right to the condition of personhood, whatever it may be. By the same token, Raz argues, if being loved is the most important thing to me, then I would have a right to be loved. Okay, we know that. In addition to the value-right conflation, Raz notices another major flaw in the traditional account, like, well, I mean, I wouldn't say like Griffin, but certainly like mine. Even if we grant that human rights guarantee the exercise of people's most important property, it is difficult to set a limit to the things people need to exercise successfully that property. So how much resources do you need in order to be able to be an agent? If we understand personhood as the capacity to decide one's plan of life and pursue it free of obstacles, then it is difficult to spell out exactly what one needs to be a person or an agent. Griffin talks of minimum education and information, as well as of minimum provisions of resources and capabilities as the threshold below which one is no longer a person. But this is evidently problematic. To begin with, as Dento noticed in his critique of Gewirth, slaves obviously have both basic education and capabilities. Otherwise, they would be worthless to a master. What do you do with a slave if he doesn't understand what you say? If you cannot give a complex order, so they need to have basic education and capabilities. If we mean more than minimum education and resources, the minimum education and resources slaves have, then setting in a non-arbitrary way the amounts of goods necessary to fulfill the requirements of personhood becomes difficult. Intuitively, human rights are not rights to a good life, but to a decent one, and who is to say what decency for an entity endowed with personhood requires? So that's why it's a threshold objection. Where do you draw the line below which the human rights are violated? So now the question for us, we have already seen these critiques against the instrumentalists. both the value right conflation and the threshold objection. Now the question becomes, to what extent these critiques apply to our approach? Now, let's start with the first objection. The question here becomes whether the specific orthodox approach we defend is guilty of the value right conflation Ras imputes to Griffin. Remember that what distinguishes our approach from Griffin's is that we do not start from the premise that we are interested in a capacity of ours, autonomy, and for that very fact we are logically bound to take the conditions of autonomy seriously. We are saying, rather, that human beings are inherently worthy creatures, and for that reason they ought to be treated in a certain way. Actually, we are saying that human beings are autonomous, therefore inherently worthy creatures, and therefore ought to be treated in a certain way. Autonomy is not for us the most important thing, and we are not entitled to human rights because of the importance we attach to it. We are autonomous, and therefore ipso facto, independently of the interest we take in that, worthy creatures that deserve respect regardless of whether we recognize the value of that freedom. Moreover, so it's an objectivist perspective here in this sense. Moreover, unlike Griffin, for our approach, autonomy is not objectively valuable in the same way in which love or being loved is. So, there is a difference between the value of autonomy and the value of being loved. Because being autonomous is not a commodity, a good of some sort. It is a status. It means occupying a place in the universe that rules out certain forms of treatment as incompatible with that status. In the same way in which only certain forms of addressing judges or high public officials are consonant with their role and function, so one cannot sincerely esteem the human status attached to our autonomy, so one cannot sincerely believe that we are autonomous, and at the same time engage in the sorts of abuses, discrimination, and offenses we usually understand as human rights violations. So I guess that I have a relatively easy way out from the value right conflations, because I'm not saying simply because I need something I have a right to something. I'm saying I am this kind of creature, and ipso facto, in virtue of this status, certain things cannot be done to me, as in virtue of this fact I have certain rights. Now, which specific rights is a more difficult question.
Yes.
Yeah.
I don't know. I feel that this kind of answer is not so satisfactory. I don't know if I'm understanding right, but I would ask, or somebody would ask, that why an autonomous person deserve to be treated or deserve not to be violated. Because it seems to me that we are still deriving from a fact that it's a status. You said it's not like the instrumentalist. We need autonomous, so we use moral to get this. But how can we move from a status that we just gain through evolution to the point that a right, a duty, I cannot just violate this person because he has this status of being autonomous? It seems to me that still doesn't answer completely the question. I would ask this.
Well, I mean, that's a question you already asked when you talked about the is-ought gap, and I in fact told you that the same impression of a jump from the is to the ought could also affect orthodox perspectives like mine. I guess here the intuition is that taking seriously the fact that you are autonomous implies a number of things. It implies, to begin with, that you are the most valuable entity in the universe as you know it, because nothing has autonomy exacts the kind of awe and respect that Kant thinks autonomy produces immediately in this notion of Achtung, you know. When once you realize that that guy has this capacity, you have this feeling of a little bit of fear. I mean, of course, about yourself, about the others. Something. Now, how does that?
A moral value, or you said the most valuable thing in the universe? Is this a moral value, or a feature that is very, very uncommon, and I can say no other animal has? But it's a moral value, because it seems that if we say this, we are just implying that there's a moral standard outside, and we can say that this is valuable and this is not, or this feature is valuable.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
What would you say?
Well, yeah, that's a difficult question. I mean, so you're saying if I say that realizing that we are autonomous already includes a moral evaluation and not just the recognition of, you know, a special feature or something like that, then I'm begging the question because I have already made the jump from the is to the ought. I don't know, I think I should think more about it, but I'm fairly sure that I am perfectly with Kant here. He didn't think that there was any problem in moving from the recognition of our autonomy to the attribution of worth to us. I mean, I don't think he ever meant that an extra logical passage is needed. Now, why did he think so, and was he entitled to think that way? Well, the easy answer, the scholastic answer, is that, again, autonomy is not one of the many features that you find out there in nature. It's the feature that gets you above nature. Now you should come. Are you sure? I mean, didn't you tell us that autonomy comes out of nature through evolution? Good. Yes, I said that, but I think I can still say that even if I don't share Kant's intuition that autonomy is basically our entree into the nominal world, is what shows us as not just phenomenal entities, but also nominal entities. Even if I'm ready to go that far, there is room for my account to say that autonomy, even if produced through evolution, is something that, you know, makes human beings stand out or above, if not outside, at least stand out of nature as we know it, understood as a chain of events with no deliberation on the part of the entities to which these events happen. So, for Kant, there is an easy answer to what you just asked. I mean, once you have proven, or from the practical point of view, what have you, that you are autonomous, you are a semi-divine entity, because you are the only entity that stands out of the natural world, basically. Well, the only entity in this world that also stands out of the natural world. For me, again, I guess I have to say something along the lines that this feature doesn't push us like a rocket outside of the natural world, but certainly gives us a special place in it. Another interesting avenue to answer your objection is that another special feature of autonomy is that we are not talking like with intelligence or other things that are conditionally good. Let me go back to Aristotle here. Autonomy is not conditionally good. I mean, it's good only to the extent in which you make a proper use of that feature. So your beauty, your intelligence, your whatever natural features you may have is only good to the extent in which you make a good use of it. That doesn't seem to be the case with autonomy, because autonomy is the ability to follow the moral law. I mean, the ability to follow what you immediately perceive, remember the fact of reason, as obligatory. So that's why there is not so much of a jump from the is to the ought, because what you are is what shows you as capable of doing what you immediately perceive as obligatory. So, I mean, the fact of reason is really where the seizure between the is and the ought happens. I mean, it's the moment in which the two words touch with each other. But, you know, you're right that perhaps I should have said more along the lines I just said to avoid the impression that after all I'm also guilty of this value-right conflation. Anyway, that was the easy answer. Now there is the difficult answer, because the threshold objection is a problem for my approach as much as it is for Griffin. Because, okay, I don't put it in, obviously, in terms of how much resources do I need in order to be an agent, in order to remain a purposive agent, because I don't have this this kind of transcendental argument. But of course, the question for us becomes what specific human rights do you need in order to respect in the appropriate way your status as autonomous person? Okay, so do you need holiday with pay? Otherwise, I'm not treating you as an autonomous person, or I can do without it. Do you need to have a relatively high level of wealth to treat you as an autonomous person, or not? Okay. I recognize that I am in trouble as much as Griffin is in trouble here. But I would say, as any theoretician of human rights, except the political view. The political view says human rights are those that are already out there in the practice, so I don't have this problem of the threshold objection. I start from what human rights already are. So it's only the practice that is going to decide whether the famous holiday with pay will stay or will go away, but not an external authority. Or at least global public reason has to decide that. What I can say, I guess, is that once you have, let's see if I remember what I said in the book. Once you have established this special status for human beings, well, to begin with, certainly you cannot treat them as animals. That's something that follows, analytically from what you have already proven, right? Now, how exactly do you have to treat them in order to? Well, one way, this is Rosen approach, is to say, you have to avoid dignitary harm. So you have to avoid everything that immediately appeals as an attack to your dignity. So I can let you live in poverty, but I cannot come to you and say how shitty you are because you are so poor. I mean, I'm not endorsing this view, but one way is to say, okay, once you have established dignity, human rights turn out to be protection against dignitary harm. Anything that is immediately perceived as an attack to your status as a human being, as an equal person compared to the other, with an equal status with the others, that has to be avoided. That has to be ruled out by human rights. But I guess that the most promising answer there is that it is really up to not only each historical period to decide what it is implied by the recognition of our autonomous status. So I'm saying, I think it's okay from my perspective that each society at different historical times may decide what is implied by our status as autonomous beings. Some variation is perfectly okay, because this, I would not say is an empirical question, because I don't think there is a science of what is due to an autonomous person, but it is a fully political question. So the threshold objection, the most promising answer, at least the one I find most promising, to the threshold objection is to sort of bite the bullet and say, yes, I don't have a principled way of saying this amount of resources and no more than that. But at the same time to say that this answer, the specific way in which each historical time decides which resources, provisions, freedoms are to be given to someone that was already proven to be an autonomous person, is an answer that they have to find for themselves. So that's the way in which I understand the practice of human rights. It's just a spelling out what human dignity implies. But I take myself to be giving a different answer. I mean, I take myself to be given the answer about the existence of human dignity, the reality of human dignity. Again, the most promising way I have to answer the threshold objection is that first, I am as much in trouble as instrumentalists. I acknowledge that I am more in trouble than the political view, but at the same time, I think there is a way out, saying that the practice to which the political view appeals is, within my account, something that is precisely meant to spell out a core value, though, that the political view denies, or at least is non-committal to. So the political view say, I don't want even hear about human dignity. Whereas I say, I think we can say something meaningful about human dignity, and then let the practice, let the culture, the evolution, do the work of deciding what it takes to be respectful of this status. I am tired. Do I have a right to be tired? Okay, I'm not going to talk about the parochial objection, because but first, again, it's very cursory. I mean, I try to say something meaningful about the 5 major religions in this world. So Christianity, Confucianism, Buddhism, Hinduism, and Judaism, most representative in the sense that they have most followers on social media, but it's too long, too cursory, and you should read probably also the book by Alessandro Ferrara on quite different issue here, but makes similar points. He doesn't try to show that human dignity is consonant to these 5 different liberal traditions. He tries to show that the ideal of equality, self-determination, are implicit in these various traditions, and of course I make use of them because human dignity is not the same thing as equality, freedom and self-determination, but if you have an argument that shows that these values are present in these 5 different religions, you are in a better position to show that autonomy is also not alien, individual autonomy is not alien to tradition as it's usually claimed to be. I mean, the famous talk about Asian values. What is the difference between Western values and Asian values? The Asians like the community over the individual, whereas we like the individual over the community. We think that the individual takes priority, whereas they think that the well-being of the community is the first concern. I mean, it's a long story. If you're interested in this specific debate, I'm more than happy to indicate good pieces of literary work on these points, specific points. I teach a course on human rights in Catania. That's one of the points that is more popular in term papers. I always like to talk about Islam and human rights, Asian value and human rights, because as you know, in Europe we have this, controversial relations with the Islamic world, which is exacerbated, of course, by the phenomenon of immigration, and so the philosophical repercussions are quite easy to understand. Okay, let me thank you so much for your attention. Excellent question I've received, and I hope we'll have another chance to meet.
Yeah.
All right.
And I would like to thank you very much, Luigi. It was very interesting, and I think that you open very topics for reflection in studies, and I think that you'll be in contact in this project. And I invite you for the next course that will be given by Professor Heine Klein, not in the next week, but in another week, about the Kant's doctrine of virtue.
Oh yeah, nice.
Yes, and
We shouldn't be there.
it's the Professor Klein came in the same project of Kant in South America that Luigi is the coordinator. And thank you very, very much for your course and for your brave resistance to do it in 3 days or 5 hours course. Thank you so much.
I wanted to show them autonomous.